welcome back to Mind Games with Guerin Emig, a weekly Sellout Crowd production on the network. I'm Guerin, columnist for Sellout Crowd. So glad you've joined me for another show. I think you're going to like this. We're talking college football with Ralph Russo, national college football writer with the Associated Press. College football never sleeps. Never sleep. I don't know if it ever has, but now it's like it doesn't even doze. It doesn't nap. So we'll get into that here in just a second. We got some topics to talk about and turn them back toward Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. But first, of course, a thanks to the sponsors of Mind Games for their support. Next Gen Roofing is on the list. Thanks to Next Gen, FireLakeJobs.com, MidFirst Bank, our friends at Two Fellas Movers, always supportive, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, 988 Oklahoma's Mental Health Lifeline, and Oklahoma Ford Dealers. Drive in your best in Oklahoma Ford Dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Good to see you, Ralph. How you been?
Good, Guerin. As you said, there's not much of an off season these days, and damn it, I'm going to take some vacation soon, regardless, and it's going to have to just go on without me.
You leave your phone at home. I used to say put it on silent. I'm not sure that's good anymore. I think you just leave the thing at the house or apartment. So
I'm looking forward to deleting Twitter from my phone for about a week. For about a week.
Well, let's start with something I think we can call good. The coaching carousel has not just slowed but stopped, right? There's nothing else that can happen there unless you're going to break a story for me.
Not today, as we speak. I do think we have come down to the point where it should be stopped. And the fact that it went into almost mid-February is pretty notable. Mm-hmm. We ended up with 30 FBS schools changing coaches,
right?
14 of those in the Power Five. And that was in a year we really thought might be somewhat tame. Mm-hmm. Because there has been so much activity the last couple of years. So, conventional wisdom would say if all these Power Five schools have already changed coaches in the last couple of years, well, they're not going to, how many more will change coaches? And then Nick Saban retires and Michigan, Jim Harbaugh goes back to the NFL and the whole thing goes spinning out of control again.
You mentioned Harbaugh going to the Chargers. There's Jeff Hafley leaving Boston College, right, for a coordinator. It was at the Packers. I've already forgotten.
Yeah, Packers.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about something that you covered on your show. You have the Associated Press Top 25 College Football podcast that you do weekly. And I know a recent show you did centered around not just the changes that took place, but this idea that with all of the trouble related, all of the stress related to college football, college coaches are suddenly looking for the escape hatch, right? And people go there now. I get the sense that you're ready to dispel the idea that this is a flight from the sport, the industry.
So, I guess I'm skeptical of the fact that it is a troubling trend for the sport insofar as, well, where will we find good coaches? Mm-hmm. I do think the job has never been tougher. And I also think that if you can get to the NFL, if you're a coach who has the ability to get to the NFL, you might be more likely to try that path. Harbaugh is a unique situation. Harbaugh's already been to a Super Bowl, right?
Well,
there's not a lot of coaches with Jim Harbaugh's resume out there. Jeff Hafley has an NFL background and NFL connections. So again, to a certain degree, I think Jeff Hafley and others maybe in similar situations might also be getting ahead of the posse a little bit. I think Hafley had done a pretty good job at BC, but I also think heading into next year, if he didn't do a better job, he could be looking at being on the hot seat. Mm-hmm. So if I'm thinking, well, do I want to be the Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator or do I want to be BC's coach on the hot seat next year? That might be an interesting choice for me to make, right? I just think this idea that there is going to be this brain drain and who will coach all of our college teams. Well, there's only 32. I think it's 32 NFL teams, I think.
Yeah, right.
32.
I think so.
The jobs in college pay really well.
Yeah,
they're good jobs. I don't think we're going to have a hard time finding coaches to fill these jobs. And I would also suggest if the jobs have gotten that hard, you can go coach Division 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. Like you won't have to worry about the portal so much in NIL. If it's really the problem is I just want to coach ball, then, there are places where you can do that. So when I start seeing coaches make those decisions and decide, I don't want my Power 5 coordinator or assistant job. I want to go coach Division 2 or 3 or go coach high school ball. Maybe then I will be a little more worried about whether we're going to have enough coaches to go around.
Sure. Let's tie then the volatility of college football and that having a repercussion for the industry, the coaching industry, into what's going on here where I am, Ralph, in Oklahoma. Mike Gundy is mostly love, but some hate relationship with his fan base. And part of that is, as you've followed from afar, self-inflicted. He's done some things he shouldn't have along the way. He's an interest. He's a character, for lack of a better term. But he's entrenched, right? He's 20 years. This will be number 20 for him at OSU. Does the changing dynamics of college football and the tide working against older, more tenured coaches see Nick Saban as that starts to turn against him? Nick said, finally, this is enough. I'm going to do something else, and leaves Alabama. Should there be more of an appreciation even around here for someone like Gundy who's willing to ride out the change and stay entrenched?
So, yeah, it's interesting, like what the, regional local perception is of Gundy and I guess what the national perception is. I do think a couple of years ago, there was this sense looking from the outside in that, wonder if that tenure has run its course, just as what you said, right? He has been there a long time. Sometimes you have one message and one voice, things can get a little stale. But then he goes out last year and wins 9 games in the regular season and plays in the Big 12 championship game. I just, from my long range view of this, the guy's a top 20 coach in the country. I can maybe top 15. I think when he is most underappreciated or undersold, he tends to rise up and have these really good seasons with teams that you think, like kind of figure it out on the fly last year. As bad as they looked early in the season, and it was a team that definitely had some holes. Again, they win the Big 12 championship game and beat the biggest, in the last bedlam for the foreseeable future. That's a game that if you're in that rivalry, that counts 5, right? He hasn't won that many of them, but you win that one, and it almost counts as more than one. So I think, to me, I found myself moving into a place with Gundy. It's like, hey, man, as long as he wants to do that job, he should just get a chance to do it, because I don't know if you're going to find anybody better at doing it. Again, I can understand if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you might be finding yourself thinking like, is this all there is? Can we do a little better? Maybe we've run its course, but I don't know if you're going to find anybody to do that job better than Mike Gundy has done it, because every time you underestimate him, he comes up and, has a huge season, wins 10 games.
There has always been a be careful what you wish for idea behind that, right? And I think, again, it's reinforced by just the changing nature of the sport, because if you lose a coach, you're liable to lose half your two deep, if not more, right? Yeah. But it's easier to jump into the portal. Guys are looking for reasons to do it, even if the coach sticks around, right? And it's not that OSU doesn't have a plan in place, but I imagine that it might be a little shinier and wealthier at places like Columbus, Ohio, and Eugene, Oregon. So I just wonder if, again, every fan base, not just OSU's, needs to maybe have a reckoning with the relationship with the coach, just because of the sport almost as much as the person.
I would add this real quick, that I think it is riskier than ever before to change coaches. I think now more than ever, you're changing coaches when you really have to. And at all cost, you're trying to avoid the coaching change, because the volatility that comes with it is greater than ever. So the idea that you can make a transition and all of a sudden you lose a whole roster or things like that, it's just, you never know what you're going to get when you dip into the grab bag of coaches and how that's going to work out. And then you tie that to the roster volatility. I think now more than ever, you want to avoid that.
Let's move to Norman for just a second before we leave the topic of coaches behind. And you used the word volatility. There was certainly a lot of that just a couple of years ago in Norman. It was weird because there hadn't been forever. Nice. And all of a sudden, Lincoln Riley takes the USC job on a Sunday that all of us are thinking, well, he's not going to LSU. He just said so last night. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. And so here comes Brent Venables, first-time head coach, 6-7 first season. The SEC all of a sudden is looming like a saber-toothed tiger, and crouch maybe might be the better verb. He goes 10-4, 10-3, I guess. This year, Ralph, does that assuage in your mind concerns that this could become a volatile time for a program as usually stable, typically stable as OU? Or is that just a one season thing and let's just see what happens?
Yeah. So I think I expected more year one. And I think I remember using the term, I am going to bet on the Oklahoma-ness of Oklahoma, not necessarily the Brent Venables. Like not that we'll see how that works out, but Oklahoma has proven over the years that it generally does football right. Like it gets it right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to bet on Oklahoma being Oklahoma. And that's what we ended up seeing last year. But I will also say that, part of Oklahoma being Oklahoma was built into it being the big dog in the Big 12. And you move into the SEC where you're, I don't want to say a small fish in a bigger pond because that's a bit of a slight to Oklahoma, but you aren't the biggest fish, right? There's a lot of fish that are about as big as you in this pond. It's definitely a more crowded pond in the big. So you get back to that volatility piece of we have to be encouraged by what we've seen out of Venables, not just on the field, but also in recruiting. He seems to be building some things along the line of scrimmage in the way that you saw SEC Clemson do those things. We're going to load up on we're going to find those defensive linemen. We're going to convince them to come here. So that's encouraging. But what this looks like, and this goes not just for Oklahoma, it goes for most of the SEC. What the new reality of the SEC is going to, I think, be jarring for a lot of fans. That, we have a really good team and we just went 8-4 because this league is a bear.
Yeah.
Like I just think that there's a new reality coming for the SEC, especially the Big Ten to a lesser degree, but a similar but lesser degree, that I think is going to make a lot of people recalibrate what we think of as success. And in a place like Oklahoma, I think it could be even more jarring because, success is championships and double-digit win seasons, and we don't want to hear anything about anything else.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be hard to attain in the new SEC.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think everyone still around here, Ralph, is worked up over the sight of Alabama and Norman and Tennessee and Norman and road trips to the Grove and Auburn and LSU. And they're caught up in sort of in that carnival. And I get it, starry-eyed over how all of a sudden it's not Tech, West Virginia, KU, it's these schools. But if 8-4 becomes more the norm, the question becomes how long do those stars stay in those eyes? It'll be an interesting balance there. I think that fans realistically might have to strike moving forward.
It's the one thing I always wondered, and I remember talking to people about this, again, some sort of this like 30,000 foot perception of why I always question whether Oklahoma would want to make this type of move. In that Oklahoma's brand, the core of its brand is championships, right? We are the championship. Like, Texas had all the money. Texas had all the hype. Texas had its own network. Oklahoma had the championship trophies, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah. Stoops, that was every 10th word from Stoops was championships, right?
Yeah. And what does it mean when that is no longer your brand to the extent where, and it's not just football, though a lot of it was football, but it's a lot of the other sports where you can be, again, going back to that biggest fish in the pond. And it's just not and this is not a slight at Oklahoma. I can imagine some of your viewers are looking at this and they want to jump through their computers and strangle me. But I just don't know if that's a realistic reality in the SEC. And what does that mean? What does that mean for Oklahoma? Now, they made the jump, and I think they'll be okay because Oklahoma is Oklahoma. But you are giving up a bit of your identity in that we are the champions, right? We are the champions around here, and we stack championships.
Yep.
And I don't think that's going to be the case in the new SEC.
You know, one more thing on the topic, Ralph. You know, what's really wild is that when the news first broke, this was going on. Lincoln Riley Starr was still pretty tall in Norman. You know, he wasn't. He was still in good graces and winning championships. And you looked at the situation in Austin, since everything seems to be tied to Texas when you bring up OU and the move to the SEC. Yeah. You looked at Austin and you thought, what the bleep are they doing? They are as unstable as any so-called, you know, football royal can be. How is this in their best interest? And here we are, a couple of years later, the only coach of the, unless I've completely gone into a mind lock, I think I've got this right, Ralph. The only coach that's still there from the playoffs is Sark. The other three,
yes. Right. From last year's playoff.
All of a sudden, they've got not just the right guy, but the guy who's willing to stick around, and they're managing NIL. Well, they should be managing NIL well. They're Texas. They grow money. And so is it the script is flipped a little bit. It's Oklahoma that's got to worry a little bit more about, are we really ready for this than Texas, after it was the other way around when this news first broke.
Yeah, I do think so, and it shows how fast things can flip. I do think Texas, you know, I remember having a conversation with somebody when Saban retired, and we had that couple of day window when we weren't sure who was going to be the next coach because they moved so quickly. And of course, Sark's name came up. I remember talking to somebody who basically said, listen, I think Sark thinks now that Saban is gone, he has a better job than the Alabama job, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, when you remove Saban, right? I think when Saban's there, everybody is sort of running to catch Saban, but you remove Saban, and now all of a sudden, I think there are a whole bunch of folks around the SEC and around the country who then thought to themselves, I'm in a better position now than going to follow Saban. So, and listen, this stuff changes very quickly. You are absolutely right. Oklahoma beat Texas last year, right? So I'm sure all the Sooner fans want to remind us of that. But it is interesting that Texas does look like they're going to be the top 5 team heading into next season, whereas Oklahoma will probably be something in the 10 to 15 range. And what does that mean? And I think again, I think we look at Sark and think, okay, he's got to go in at Texas, and we look at Venables and say, let's see how that works out. We progress, yes, but we're not exactly sure.
Yeah, I hear you. So talking about the SEC and realignment and where all of this is headed, anytime news breaks and the term joint advisory group is involved, I usually ignore it, right? Because it sounds it sounds like another useless committee that they may do a few things, but is it really going to amount to much? Let me know if you're really going to make some hard decisions. But you attach SEC and Big Ten to that joint advisory group, and then you start to think, is this, if separation, power to two major conferences, the majorist, if I can use butcher grammar, conferences separating was always the end game here. Any kind of alliance between those two ought to get our full attention. Do you buy it, or are you landing more on joint advisory group? Let's just wait and see what happens here.
No, I do think it should be, I don't know, a warning. Let me put it this way. College sports problems are top-down problems. So they should be, the people at the top should be very proactive in solving those problems. And when I say that, I don't mean the top of the NCAA. I do mean the top of what used to be the Power 5, now is Power 4, and in reality is a Big 2. So, yes, I think those two conferences should be talking to each other and trying to figure stuff out, because I've heard this from other people in college sports when it was a true Power 5. If those folks can just get their stuff together, we'll figure it out from there. Like when you're lower down the rung, you're not really that worried about what they're going to do. What you're actually trying to, I think a lot of folks were hoping for is, no, let them figure out what they want to do, and then we can react to what they're, what the rest of college sports should be like. Here's where I would be a little worried. If I was in the Big 12, I might be a little worried.
Yeah.
Because again, suddenly am I in position where I'm going to be a little more marginalized? I think that what I would worry in general about an alliance, and I hate to use that word because that became a word that's taboo now. Any kind of partnership between the SEC and the Big Ten, where I would worry, I think it's a good thing that they are talking, and I think they should take responsibility to try to fix some of these problems.
Yeah, right.
But I think what I would worry is, are they going to marginalize the rest of college sports even more than they already have?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, are the SEC and the Big Ten willing to not necessarily try to squeeze every last nickel they can for themselves out of the structure, leave a little bit behind to keep it a healthy Big 12, a healthy ACC? ACC is a little dysfunctional within right now, so we'll see what happens with that. A healthy NCAA tournament, right? Like, are they willing to still operate in a big tent and keep the rest of college sports healthy? Or are they just going to say, hey, man, we're in it for ourselves and we're building empires here?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Again, we'll tie it back to these parts. Oklahoma State, they've been under threat in essence since OU and Texas decided to leave, because remember Bowlesby's infamous line in the courtroom, we just lost 50% of our media value, with Oklahoma and Texas departing. And it be an existential threat to the security of the Big 12, and therefore by nature, Oklahoma State. Cowboys and everyone else in the Big 12 rode that out because Bowlesby went and got some decent value with the replacements. And Brett Yormark has picked up where Bob left off and done some imaginative work. We'll see if it's good work, but seems like it might be on track to becoming helpful and fruitful work for the conference. There's some stability here, but I don't know if the threat ever went away, Ralph. And I think that as long as you see what the SEC just announced its distribution, right? It was at 50, something like 50.
It was 50, a little over 51 million per team. And again, like, the new television contract has not even kicked in yet. So understand that 51 is about to take off.
I remember the projections. I don't know if it was Sportico or someone actually put the graph out a couple of years ago that had SEC and Big Ten at 80 or 90 million, and everyone else just fighting for 50. And I'm like, you want to know why OU went to the SEC? It wasn't just to play Georgia and LSU and Alabama. This is why, right? And so that threat's always going to be there so I'm glad you made the point about, look, this potentially becomes a marginalization of the Big 12 and therefore OSU. And if you're looking at that in Stillwater or Lawrence, Kansas, Manhattan, Ames, Iowa, it I guess damn well better have your attention, whether it's a joint advisory group, an alliance, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, listen. Again, we go back to like I think everybody is going to be over the next few years absorbing a new reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we literally are moving into a new reality between the conference realignment and the playoff, and frankly, we're going to probably have a new reality in terms of what the relationship is between the athletes and the schools.
Sure.
Right. What we're probably heading towards is something where there's revenue sharing and maybe employment status and something along those lines. So everything is truly, and this again goes back to the alliance, or whatever you want to call a partnership between the SEC and the Big Ten. If those two conferences come away and say, well, we're gonna pay our athletes $100,000 a year. I don't think it's going to end up that way, but let's just say. I mean, I don't know if the Big 12 can do that.
Mm-hmm.
When you talked about those projections, let's just say it's $75 million a year for the SEC and the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be almost double.
Yeah,
or at least,
right.
It's going to be, 40 million, 30 million more than what the Big 12 is bringing in. So what happens to the Big 12 when the SEC and the Big 10 are recruiting to come here, you make $100,000 a year, and the Big 12 schools are going, well, how's 50?
Yeah.
Or like, how do we do this? How do we keep up with the SEC and the Big 10?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I go back to this idea of absorbing a new reality. I'm not trying to be doomy and gloomy, But I think that the next few years, there will be moments when even the folks who follow the sport and cover the sport go, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh, I thought this was coming, but I didn't really understand what exactly it would look like and the impact of it all.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're just heading into a brave new world here with a lot of uncertainty that we can make some projections, but
Mm-hmm.
until it really plays out, I think that we might not be understanding exactly what we're getting into here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you referenced it a little bit ago, and again, tying it back to Stillwater and OSU specifically. I mean, there is a world, a reality where it behooves the SEC and the Big Ten to have a healthy member, FBS wide membership, right? That you don't.
I think so, Guerin. I hope they think that.
I think I heard you on a show. I think it was yours. It might have been another that you were a guest on just the other day. Ralph say, what if the SEC and the Big Ten become antitrust targets?
Yeah. And I do think that could slow things down, right? I think that you could all of a sudden, I do think it could slow conference realignment. It might be able to recalibrate exactly what they want to be, right? Do they want to turn into the AFC and NFC and we're just going to have our own thing here where we mostly play against each other? And are they crushing the competition around them, the competition being other conferences? So I do wonder what the legal ramifications are of that and what the legal landscape looks like going forward. And if that motivates a more Big Tent approach for those two conferences.
Yeah. You've been doing this 20 years or longer?
Yeah, about 20. Yeah.
Okay.
That's old guy.
That's what I comp to. So how do you feel about all this? I think I can live with it. I don't think anyone likes it, full stop, but I think I can write about it another few years if I'm allowed. I think I'll enjoy going to games still on Saturday. I'm not sure I'll be thinking about existential threats to, the model when I show up in Norman or Stillwater next fall for the first time. So how are you squaring all this as a guy who's done this, and I take it still really enjoys doing this and covering the sport?
I enjoy a lot of it. I never thought I was going to I think I'm a lawyer now. I think I could pass the bar. I never thought I was going to have to cover this much, read this many court documents and have to know that much about legalese to cover college sports when I decided I wanted to be a sports writer when I was 13 years old. I think you are right, by the way. I tell people all the time, this is how they get you. How they get you is Saturday. If they could if the people who run I'm talking about college football in particular, but college sports in general, if they can just not burn this thing down before they get to Saturday, because on Saturday, everybody's troubles go away.
That's right.
We sit down for 12 hours and we, orgasmically watch this incredible product, which is college football and the pageantry and the wildness and so much of it. If they can just, if the adults can just not screw it up and just get to Saturday, I think we're generally fine. So I still enjoy that part of it. I still enjoy covering the kids. I call them kids. I hope doesn't sound demeaning, but I love covering, the athletes, but a lot of it has become a bit, like, wow, like, does this ever end? And I do wonder if it will be as enjoyable going forward in this new machination. I do still enjoy it. And I think that ultimately, if you can protect the product, which is the games, you will still have a vibrant business and enterprise. But all the other stuff does weigh you down a little bit. And I can understand it being for fans, like not necessarily something you want to embrace either.
Sure. Yeah. My dad's is diehard in Ohio State. He went, it's legit. He graduated. He's a Buckeye, but you know how that base can be. He gets into it. And yet for all the, every other day, he'll be upset about this isn't what I signed up for, right? This isn't what I recognized. I still see him making, not just a 4-hour commitment to watching the Buckeyes on Saturdays, but, another 4 on the aftermath, whether that's post-game message boards, call-in shows, whatever. So that, and judging from the ratings, he's not alone, right? It's not like I don't think the sport has suffered for the turn that it's taken. I don't in terms of mass consumption.
Yeah, I think how they get you is game day, but also even in conference realignment, because we will complain and lament loss of rivalries, this tradition, but then you flip to the schedule and go Oklahoma, Alabama. All right, I'll sign up for that. We've just complained about how awful it was what the SEC did, how awful it is what the Big Ten did, and I can't believe they destroyed all these traditions. And what happens with Bedlam? And then the schedules come out, and you're like, Michigan or Oregon, okay, I'm down with that. So we all become hypocrites to a certain degree, because. And even with the new Big 12, right? Like the Big 12 is not what it used to be, but okay, Arizona, Utah, like Arizona State, like these are some interesting matchups. It creates a really interesting conference with a lot of parity in it. Yeah. And hey, we could have a 6-way race for the top.
Yes.
So like the allure of some of this newness is also interesting, and it does draw you in. I think it does draw people in. How the playoff will work. I always say something, Guerin, we're old guys. There are a whole bunch of new people coming, like 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds who don't care about our traditions, who are now starting to, become college football fans. And they will, in 15 years, go, you remember when so-and-so was in the Big 12? Yeah, I guess that was a thing, right? Like they won't care, or they'll go, they had at one point the playoff was only 4 teams, and a bunch of people who are like 35-year-old fans will go, boy, that was a stupid idea. How could they have only had 4 teams in the playoff? So when we complain about this stuff, I always like to put it in perspective that like, what we hold on to, other people won't care about in 10 years.
Yep. And people do adapt, right?
Very adaptable.
Coaches will tell you that either they adapt or they quit, which may be happening in some places. Yeah. Football, basketball, and otherwise. But if that's their tagline, maybe that should be ours, and fans and everyone else attached to this game. Man, you brought up needing a law degree. I was going to ask you about some of the cases floating around here, but I'd rather leave the show on a positive note, and I get the feeling you landed there. So how about we reserve a date for another program where we perhaps dive into the courtroom and figure out which of the cases we should rank highest among doomsday for our jobs, for our professions, for our passions, and all that stuff.
I will happily do that and dust off my law degree.
We'll make a date of it. In the meantime, tell folks, Ralph, where they can find your work and where they can hear or watch your show.
Yeah, so the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast, wherever you get your pods, as they say, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere, and again, anywhere you like to find them. With the AP in my work, we're sort of everywhere and nowhere. We are in every major newspaper, news organization around the country, but there is apnews.com, where you can click on the sports tab in college football and find the poll and everything else that goes into our college football coverage. Again, or you know what, Ralph D. Russo AP on what is now X, what used to be Twitter. I generally post all my work there, and I like and my musings about college sports and occasionally the New York Mets.
All right. Well, listen, promise me you'll get some rest between now and the next time I have you on. Take that vacation, leave that phone either on silent. I'd leave it on silent and back in the house. But
I might throw it into a pond.
just kill the thing altogether. Yeah. That might be the way to go. Ralph Russo, my guest on this week's episode of Mind Games. Thanks to him for coming on. Please follow his work. Continue to read his stuff as we head into what used to be an off season of college football. We'll have him on again soon. We want to thank Jacqueline Musgrove, our producer, for her efforts, tireless as they are. Michael Lane, our creative director, for his. We'll be back with another episode of the show next week. Until then, please stay well, stay safe, and enjoy yourself.